In this video, we'll discuss the events that occurred in Hawaii. On the afternoon of Christmas Eve 1991, 23-year-old Dana Ireland left her parents' house in Puna but never returned. After discovering her disfigured bicycle, shoe, and hair clumps, bystanders called 911. However, Dana wasn't there. The investigation dragged on for several decades, and although there was the trial and the verdict, the case hasn't been closed. The evolution of DNA testing methods played a crucial role in this case. Dana Ireland's story is probably the most high-profile investigation in the history of Hawaii. Dana Marie Ireland was born on December 12, 1968, in Fort Belvoir, Fairfax County, Virginia, USA. She was the youngest daughter in the family of John Ireland and Mary Louise Crank. Her sister Sandra was 7 years older than her. In 1991, when Dana was 23 years old, she and her parents were visiting her sister, who lived in Hawaii. On December 24th in the afternoon, she took her sister's bike for a ride. Later, people found her bike, shoe, and clump of hair next to the side of the road. But Dana herself was not there. From the bike's appearance, it was clear that Dana got hit by a car. The impact was so strong that it deformed both wheels and the steering wheel, and the seat came off altogether. Unfortunately, the hope that the man who hit Dana took her to the hospital instead of leaving her to die was false. The reality turned out to be much scarier than anyone could have imagined. Dana was found 5 miles from where they found her bike. She had severe injuries on her body and head and was naked from the waist down. Hence, one can conclude that someone didn't just hit her with a car, someone also took advantage of her weakness. Nightmares haunt nurse Jerry Gallagher. She can't escape the memory of Christmas Eve 1991 at a spot on a seaside fishing trail in Wawa, where she was led to Dana Ireland. Gallagher lived with her husband Randy on Saddleick Road, a rough, unpaved road cutting into the coastal jungle 25 miles by road southeast of Hilo. At 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve 1991, a friend named Brian knocked on their door to call Gallagher, a licensed nurse. He wore a Christmas hat with blinking lights, but his mood was far from festive. He drove her to where Dana was lying, a mile from Gallagher's house. Dana was naked from the waist down, and the inner side of her legs was full of bruises. Gallagher remembers trying to help the injured young woman. Using a first aid kit, she bandaged her wounds. The most severe injury was on the back of her head. She asked the woman her name. "Island," she seemed to say. Gallagher asked who attacked her, but Dana wasn't coherent. "Please give me the keys so I can drive home," Ireland said. Gallagher tried to keep her awake. An ambulance arrived more than 2 hours after the girl got hit by a car. The lack of phones in the area led to a significant delay in getting help. The medical staff of the police and fire departments were busy with other cases. However, their own mistakes also led to a 34-minute delay. The dispatcher who received the call about the injured young woman gave the wrong address of where they found Dana, which caused a loss of valuable time. "I thought 1,000,000 times about taking her down to the hospital in my car, but I was so concerned about paralyzing her," Gallagher says. "I've had nightmares about it. None of us knew that it was going to take so long. It took an indescribably long time to get help down to her. If they had got help to her, she would have lived." An ambulance with Dana Ireland inside arrived at Hilo Hospital at 7:56 p.m. At this time, John and Mary Ireland were already looking for their daughter, whose disfigured bicycle lay by the side of the road. They heard the news about an injured woman found 5 miles away. However, they didn't know that this woman was Dana. "We thought someone had hit her and taken her to the hospital," Mary recalled later. John told Mary and his eldest daughter Sandra to go to the hospital while he stayed near Dana's bike. When the ambulance brought Dana to the hospital, her mother and older sister were already there. Doctors fought for Dana's life for 4.5 hours, but unfortunately, they could not save her. She was pronounced dead at 12:25 a.m. The official cause of death was blood loss due to extensive traumatic injuries of head, pelvis, and abdomen caused by a motor vehicle accident. Dana's family went home and heard the radio the following morning. They thought some car hit their daughter, but the radio said Dana's death wasn't accidental. When John spoke to a local police representative, he was told nothing about the fact that not only had Dana been hit by a car, but that someone had taken advantage of her vulnerability afterward. He had asked a police lieutenant if the attack was deliberate. "You're listening to rumors," the lieutenant told him. Dana's death came as a shock to her family. Her death irreversibly changed their lives. However, they would later realize another challenge awaited them: many years of searching for suspects and trials. The police launched an investigation, which the local newspapers described as intense. The police found a T-shirt that belonged to the criminal at the crime scene. Next, investigators seized as evidence a sheet with traces of semen on which Dana was lying when brought to the hospital. Seminal fluid was also on Dana's body. Moreover, a bite mark on her body was a potential clue, since it looked like the teeth prints of the person who attacked her. As a result, the authorities had a DNA sample of the criminal at their disposal. But it was 1991. It wasn't of much help to the investigation process. Another potential clue was the tire tracks where they found Dana's bike. Investigators interviewed residents, hoping to find witnesses who saw Dana getting hit by a car, but no one saw this moment. Or perhaps, for some reason, they remained silent. The place where the bike was found and the place where Dana was found was not a densely populated area, but instead was a secluded place with a bad road where cars didn't travel very often. Due to the lack of witnesses and evidence to help find the criminal, the investigation has reached a dead end. Anyone with information about the case would have received a reward, the amount of which grew over time. However, there was no breakthrough in the case. Later, in May 1994, John Gonsalves contacted the Hawaii County Police. Gonsalves was involved in a high-profile case involving illegal substances, but even though he was facing several decades in prison, he got off with a suspended sentence. The reason for such mitigation was that he told the police that his half-brother, Frank Pauline, had important information about the Dana Ireland case. Pauline said that brothers Albert Ian Schweitzer and Sean Schweitzer were involved in the attack on Dana. The Schweitzer family lived next door to the Pauline family, and the two did not get along with one another. Frank Pauline claimed he was there when Schweitzers attacked Dana. "They ran over Dana Ireland, put her in the trunk, and took her to another place," he told the police. Hence, the police made Albert Schweitzer, Sean Schweitzer, and Frank Pauline the main suspects. After the latter's statements, there was a 30-year series of events. Therefore, to understand who Frank Pauline is, let's get to know him better. Frank Raymond Pauline Jr. was born on April 27, 1973, in Fremont, California, in the family of Frank Sr. and Patricia Pauline. At the time of the attack on Dana Ireland, Pauline lived in Puna, a few miles from where they found her. At the age of 20, Frank was already the father of 3 sons. He had his first problems with the law at the age of 9. On February 8, 1983, he got caught in a burglary. You can see his entire track record up to his maturity on your screen. The older he got, the more serious the crimes he committed became. In February 1994, a little over 2 years after Dana's death, he was sentenced to 10 years for harassment and robbery. These charges were not related to Dana Ireland, and yet it made it clear that Frank Pauline won't stop his criminal activities. Due to the crime's multitude, prosecutors dubbed him a walking crime wave at the sentencing hearing. After the hearing, Pauline lived up to his new nickname. He walked out of the courtroom before he was taken into custody to start his prison term. Classified as a fugitive, he was recaptured in Honolulu a few days later. 3 months after Pauline received a 10-year sentence, his brother John Gonsalves contacted the authorities and told them that Frank had information about the Dana Ireland case. Pauline and Gonsalves decided that providing information on the Ireland case would help the first one not to go to prison and the second, to get out of it earlier. Of course, the stepbrothers were doubtful sources of information, and yet, after a conversation with investigators, the case against John Gonsalves for illegal substances was closed. In the end, he received only a suspended sentence. After Pauline stated he had information about the Dana Ireland case, investigators from Big Island went to talk with Pauline in Honolulu, where the latter was in custody. It was a 90-minute interrogation, during which they asked to tell the details about the day of the attack on Dana. Since he claimed to be present during the attack, they took him back to the Big Island, where he reconstructed the crime and showed detectives the places he mentioned earlier. Pauline told detectives that brothers Albert Ian and Sean Schweitzers picked him up in a purple Volkswagen Beetle at his home on December 24, 1991. As he said, Ian Schweitzer was behind the wheel. The trio stopped to take illegal substances before they saw a woman standing on the side of the road. We came out by an intersection going towards Kapoho, and that's where we saw a girl standing up. As we were going past, my friend Ian looked towards the side, and he said, "Ho, look at that girl." Then we continued to go forward down the road. Pauline said they turned around because Ian wanted to talk to the woman. They were driving back at about 45 miles per hour, and Ian Schweitzer, who was behind the wheel, did not stop in time and hit Dana Ireland. As he said, the Schweitzers left the car, loaded her into the trunk in front, and continued driving. After a few miles, they stopped and pulled Dana out of the vehicle. She was still alive. Pauline stated that, unlike the Schweitzer brothers, he did not become intimate with the victim. And yet, he still said something that brought severe consequences. He said that Ian Schweitzer insisted that he find a tire iron and hit the victim on the head to end her suffering. After that, allegedly, they got back into the car and drove away. All his testimony was on paper, and Pauline signed a statement stating that he testified of his own free will. No one forced him or promised anything, and he was not under the influence of illegal substances or alcohol. After Pauline started cooperating with the police, he was transferred to the Maui Community Correctional Center for his protection. As prison officials said, he was a problem for management and received threats from other inmates. In July 1996, just over 2 years after Gonsalves gave his statement to the police, Frank Pauline retracted his story, saying he made it up because his stepbrother asked him to help him avoid jail. He said he wasn't present at the time of the attack, but still had information about who was responsible for it. According to him, he confessed he was there only because it was the only way to make them believe him. "And my brother telling me the worst thing that can happen to you is they going give you perjury," Pauline said. However, perjury wasn't among the crimes they accused him of on July 30, 1997. He was charged with taking the life of Dana Ireland, as he signed a confession stating that he hit her on the head with a tire iron. Later that year, the Schweitzer brothers also received charges. They denied their involvement in the case, stating they had been with their family on December 24, 1991. It is worth mentioning that the police had reason to believe that Pauline lied when he said he participated in the crime with the Schweitzer brothers. After all, when investigators took him to the Big Island, he could show neither the exact place where they hit Dana nor where people later found her. And yet Pauline signed the confession, which resulted in charges against him. Realizing that his stepbrother was wrong, saying that perjury was the only thing he could get accused of, he retracted his confession. Meanwhile, Gonsalves adhered to the script. Hence, the police dropped the main charges of illegal substance conspiracy against him. He testified against his half-brother Frank Pauline at the trial. At that time, DNA testing technology was not as advanced as it is now. Shortly after the arrest, the authorities collected DNA samples of Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers. The Hawaii County Prosecutor's Office also checked biological fluids from the gurney sheet used the day they took Dana Ireland to the hospital and swabs from her body. However, the police were startled when they received a report saying that the DNA of Frank Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers did not match the DNA of the criminal. Based on these results, they dropped the charges against these three men. And yet, It didn't prevent the investigation from continuing their prosecution. They just stated that someone else must be involved in this. Besides, other evidence also didn't point to these three men. The teeth prints of the Schweitzer brothers and Pauline did not match what investigators believe was a bite mark on the victim's chest. The police found no traces of Dana Ireland's blood or hair in Albert Ian Schweitzer's Volkswagen, a car that became his property only a month after her death. Perhaps pressure from the Ireland family, the public, and the press played a role in the further development of events. Albert Ian Schweitzer was 20 years old at the time of Dana Ireland's death. The only thing he had on his criminal record was related to traffic violations, such as resisting an order to pull over and racing on the roadway. Sean Schweitzer was 16 years old when Dana died. When the brothers received charges related to the Ireland case, Sean was already 23 years old. At that time, the police also charged him with fourth-degree assault in an unrelated case, namely inappropriately touching a girl. For the latter case, he received a sentence of 180 days in prison and 1 year of probation. At the time of the incident, the girl was 15, and Sean was 16. Thus, although the DNA test was negative, all three suspects involved in Dana Ireland's death violated the law at some point. It, of course, didn't help to clear their names. 5 days after Frank Pauline made his first statement to the police, investigators raided the Schweitzer family home. They took Ian's 1957 Volkswagen Beetle as evidence. Both brothers told the police they weren't with Frank Pauline, although they knew him. Sean said he was at home that Christmas Eve, and Ian said he was either at home or at his uncle's house. Ian also told the police how he got his car. Firstly, Ian denied doing any bodywork with the vehicle. When he first got the car, it was purple, but since it wasn't his color, he decided to repaint it yellow. Schweitzer's lawyers believed Frank Pauline accused the brothers because of the enmity between their families. Despite all that, the prosecutors continued to move forward. On May 5, 1999, a few days before the statute of limitations on some crimes committed against Dana Ireland, the police received what they thought was another breakthrough in the case. They received the statement from a prisoner named Michael Ortiz. Being an accomplice of Gonsalves, he was in the same cell with the Schweitzers before the police dropped charges against them. In conversations with the authorities, Ortiz claimed that Albert Ian Schweitzer confessed to him what he had done. Based on Ortiz's testimony, just 2 weeks later, Frank Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers were again charged in the Dana Ireland case. After this, some people had suspicions and distrust of the authorities. After all, they received information from a questionable source just a few days before the statute of limitations ran out. It seemed too convenient. Frank Pauline was the first to appear in court. The trial was very emotional. Pauline insisted on his innocence, telling the court that he had lied when he confessed his involvement in Dana's death. On the witness stand, Mary Ireland recalled getting that first call about what had happened to her daughter. She said something awful has happened. She said there's a bicycle in the road, a shoe, and hair, Ireland recounted. But the witnesses who linked Pauline to the crime had questionable backgrounds, and some had a lot to gain by pointing the finger. Among those who benefited from Pauline being found guilty was his half-brother Gonsalves, who became a witness for the prosecution. Witness William Chung, who also testified against Pauline, said Frank confessed his involvement in this crime. However, when asked if he saw Pauline in the courtroom, he pointed to another person, although Frank Pauline was there. The jury also saw Dana Ireland's bike, shorts, top, underwear, and a Jimmy's t-shirt recovered from the scene. Not one of those items had DNA from Pauline or the Schweitzers. To get around the lack of scientific evidence, Deputy Prosecutor Lincoln Ashida insisted that the Jimmy's t-shirt, covered in Dana Ireland's blood, belonged to Pauline. "We're not afraid of that evidence, we embrace it," Ashida said then. That same DNA technology works both ways, for the defense and the prosecution. Pauline's lawyer protested, saying the t-shirt wasn't even Frank's size. Nevertheless, the jury found that the evidence and assumptions presented at the trial were enough to convict Pauline. Despite forensic evidence showing that Pauline gave a false confession, he was found guilty and sentenced to 180 years. The next was the trial of Albert Ian Schweitzer. He knew that despite the lack of any physical evidence, Frank Pauline had been sentenced to 180 years in prison. Therefore, Schweitzer was surprised when prosecutors offered him to take a plea deal. However, he refused it, continuing to insist on his innocence. The prosecutor claimed that Schweitzer's Volkswagen Beetle was the car that hit Dana and then took her to a fishing trail where she was found. All this happened despite several facts. Firstly, in the area where they found Dana, witnesses saw another car, a pickup truck. Secondly, analysis of Schweitzer's car did not show any evidence of his involvement in this case, and Ian became the official owner of Volkswagen only in January 1992. In 2000, based on the statement of Michael Ortiz, who claimed he heard Schweitzer's confession, and the allegedly unusual circumstance of scratches on the bumper of his car, Ian Schweitzer was sentenced to 130 years in prison. After seeing his older brother convicted, Sean Schweitzer took a plea deal. He and his family changed their minds and decided not to insist on his innocence, fearing the justice system would fail them again. In the end, Sean Schweitzer pleaded guilty to the lesser charges of kidnapping and involuntary deprivation of life. Part of the deal with the prosecutor's office was that Sean Schweitzer had to accuse his brother and Frank Pauline of Dana's death and take a polygraph test to show he was honest when confessing to the crime and reporting the details. On March 24, 2000, a polygraph examiner from the State Attorney General's office administered the test. As the court documents indicated, when taking the test, Sean Schweitzer wasn't truthful when describing what happened. In other words, he lied about his involvement in the death of Dana Ireland. However, while he didn't pass the test, he still received an offer to take the plea deal. And here's why. Deputy Prosecutor Lincoln Ashita gave the judge a different statement. According to court transcripts, Ashita said Schweitzer did pass the polygraph, finding that he was not deceptive to any of the questions. Sean Schweitzer was sentenced to 5 years probation with credit for time served, 18 months. In an interview Sean gave to Hawaii News Now after his release, he said the deal with the prosecutor's office was a family decision. His brother Ian, the one sentenced to 130 years, later recalled how he thought it was pointless to imprison both brothers. Ian said losing both sons would be even more stressful for his parents, and they would not survive it. He approved the family's decision and told Sean to do what the prosecutor said to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison. Sean still feels remorseful for making the deal and testifying against his brother. And as the months and years passed, he and his family also struggled with the stain left by this case. "I went through many years of disappointment. Had hard time to find a job," Sean Schweitzer said, adding that community members made remarks about the case for years after. Dana's father, John, died in 2000 at 76. After the death of his daughter, he became an advocate for the rights of crime victims. He also worked on the adoption of a law concerning the statute of limitations for violent crimes. Ian Schweitzer and his family did not accept his wrongful conviction and continued to fight. In 2005, Ian Schweitzer applied for a case review from the Innocence Project. 5 years later, in 2010, work on this project started gaining momentum. Law students at the University of Hawaii, lawyers and professors studied old documents related to the investigation of the Dana Ireland case. The prosecutors of Hawaii County let them do their job. They allowed the Innocence Project to review the case to determine if the wrong people were convicted. Year after year passed, but the work to achieve justice did not stop. Dana's mother, Mary Louise Crank Ireland, died on October 10, 2016, at 92. During the many years Ian Schweitzer spent in prison, his parents tried to visit him as often as they could. However, the visits stopped as soon as he was transferred from prison in Hawaii to Saguaro in Eloy, Arizona. The long flight and the protracted drive from Phoenix were challenging for them, and especially for Linda Schweitzer, who was fighting breast cancer those days. That one time in the Arizona prison, her son said something to her that still stings. He said, "Mom, don't come back, because I don't want to watch you walk away from me again." On January 23, 2023, 23 years after the jury found Albert Ian Schweitzer guilty, his legal team filed a motion asking the judge to vacate the conviction based on new evidence and information. The court hearing occurred the next day. A few hours after Ian's team filed the motion, a state deputy sheriff took Schweitzer from Arizona's Saguaro Correctional Center and escorted him on several flights to Hilo. They reached it in time for the hearing. After a long night at the hotel, his family gathered at the Hilo courthouse the following morning. They were anxious to see Ian Schweitzer, who had only arrived on the island hours earlier. Dressed in an aloha shirt provided by his legal team, Schweitzer smiled when he appeared in the courtroom. His legal team presented new evidence to the court. DNA expert Nancy Dinh was one of those who testified at the trial. They tested all the items again using advanced methods unavailable during the original trials. The technology, it got better, Dinh explained. It got improved in a sense that we can now see things that we could not see before. In 2000, authorities said there was too much Dana Ireland's blood on the t-shirt, stating it as a reason they did not find any DNA of Frank Pauline or the Schweitzer brothers on it. However, scientists who studied the evidence of the Innocence Project distinguished Dana Ireland's DNA from other DNA found on the t-shirt using modern technology. They also found seminal fluid and sweat from the armpit on it. DNA expert Nancy Dinh testified that the DNA found on the t-shirt and Dana's body belonged to the same person. But this person was neither Frank Pauline nor one of the Schweitzer brothers. After Dinh's statement, a tire tread expert gave remote testimony, telling the court that Schweitzer's Volkswagen could not have left tracks found at both crime scenes. In his opinion, a larger vehicle, a truck, SUV, or van left those tracks. Dentist Adam Freeman was the last to testify. Ireland had an injury on her left breast, which, according to the initial opinion of the prosecutors, was a human bite mark. But Freeman said it wasn't a bite mark. This particular case is a poster child for bad forensic sciences where bite marks are flawed, he testified. Late in the evening, the witnesses finished testifying, after which District Court Judge Peter Kubota announced his verdict. The new DNA evidence, the tire tread evidence, the bite mark evidence, and Sean Schweitzer's recantation conclusively proves that in a new trial, a jury would likely reach a different verdict of acquittal, Kubota told the court. So therefore, the conviction of Albert Ian Schweitzer is hereby vacated, and Mr. Schweitzer shall be released immediately from custody. With those words, coming 23 years after a jury found him guilty and 25 after he got arrested, Ian Schweitzer was suddenly a free man. Next, the judge addressed Ian Schweitzer with moving words. You got 1/3 of your life ahead of you. You can live it being angry and resentful at the process or the people that put you there, or you can live it with a new freedom, Kubota said. I suggest that since you have your whole family here, you hug and love your family and live a fulfilled life and make the best of the next 1/3 of your life. Freed from the handcuffs, Schweitzer first hugged his lawyers and then his family members, some of whom he had not seen for decades. His mother was crying in his arms. Ian's son, who was very young when his father went to prison, was present in the courtroom too. They shared a hug. His younger brother Sean was also there with a smile and open arms. After the acquittal of Ian, his brother Sean's lawyer is also seeking to have his criminal record cleared. Frank Pauline died in prison in New Mexico in 2015. On April 27, 2015, an inmate, Daniel Hood, who is serving time for taking the lives of 2 people, attacked Frank Pauline, hitting him 3 times on the back of the head with a rock when they were all in the recreation yard at the Southern New Mexico Correctional Facility in Las Cruces. They were cellmates. Hood attacked Pauline because he considered him a snitch. The medical staff of the prison could not save Pauline. His family's lawyer plans to file a petition for his posthumous rehabilitation. As for Ian Schweitzer, he says that the transition from a prisoner to a free person is an arduous process. Adjusting to life outside the prison walls is more challenging than he expected. He says he fights with anxiety most of the days. Schweitzer may be entitled to compensation for wrongful imprisonment, which allows rehabilitated persons to receive $50,000 for each year spent in prison. However, it is not an easy process, but his lawyers are working to ensure he receives compensation. 3 decades later, the Dana Ireland case remains open, and the investigators hope that new methods of DNA testing and genealogy will allow them to find the person who destroyed the life of the Ireland family.